For nearly half a century, the Heckler & Koch MP5, as well as its many derivatives, had been the king of the SMG world, and there really wasn't a whole lot to compare to it. Now in the mid-2000s, Brugger and Thomet decided to throw their hat in the ring and try to come up with a PCC or SMG design which could compete with the MP5 and its incredible recoil impulse and very nice durability. And what B&T eventually came up with was the Advanced Pistol Carbine 9, or APC9, this guy here. And while it does retain the very high quality of the HK MP5, it simplifies a lot of things, particularly when it comes to its construction. The original MP5 being a stamped steel receiver with a roller delay blowback system, which is complicated and fairly expensive to make, versus the APC9, which moved to an extruded aluminum receiver, as well as a straight blowback, which typically imparts a lot of recoil with that very heavy bolt moving back and forth. However, B&T went with a hydraulic buffer which is incorporated into the stock to lessen the recoil from that bolt bottoming out against the back of the receiver. The APC9 was also intended to fix some of the ergonomic issues with the MP5, which was designed back in the 1950s, and it was really starting to show in the 2000s. The MP5 did have a nice non-reciprocating charging handle, except it was only on the left side, and it was also your bolt hold open. So it didn't have an automatic one which locks back on the magazine. You had to pull it back and twist it up into that notch to lock the bolt open, which was important because you could not insert a full 30-round magazine into an MP5 unless the bolt is held open. Additionally, while they did do some upgrades to the MP5 over the years with the controls, particularly with the Navy model of the MP5, it still did not have very well laid out controls with the safety selector, as well as the magazine release being slightly awkward compared to more modern designs which are more focused on those AR-type ergonomics. The first generation of the APC9 was released back in 2011 and had quite a few differences when compared to the Pro model I have here. The biggest ones are going to be the bolt catch and bolt release was actually a button on the side of the receiver, both sides, because it was also fully ambidextrous. However, it was just a button that you press in to release the bolt, and then there was a separate catch underneath the trigger guard which you'd have to lift up to lock the bolt open. Another big difference was with the charging handle on the Gen 1 of the APC9, which was reciprocating. You could swap it between the left and the right hand side. However, in more recent times, reciprocating charging handles have really lost a bit of their thunder, so they went ahead and updated that to a non-reciprocating system in later models. Additionally, the first generation of the APC had built-in iron sights which were attached to the top rail, and they were nice. However, they were a part which was known to break on them, and a lot of end users didn't really use those iron sights. So eventually those were removed for the APC9 Pro, which was released back in around 2018-2019. One of the earliest adopters of the APC9 was Austria's EKO Cobra counterterrorism team. So that was one of their premier counter-terrorist teams. So they adopted it fairly early on with the first generation of the APC9 with some modifications to it. So for instance, they didn't want to have those iron sights which were attached to the rail because they didn't really need that. So they eliminate that. They eliminate some of the costs of the platform in the process, and they get a fantastic submachine gun which is incredibly modern in terms of ergonomics, but actually fairly simple as well. They have also seen adoption in fairly small numbers by some other police and special forces units around the world. Namely Slovakia with their prison and court guard service, you had Belgium with customs and border police, Brazil with the Sao Paulo Civil Police, Kazakhstan with the Special Police Unit, Arlen, as well as Ukraine. They pop up every once in a while with the GWAR Special Forces. Now, what most Americans know the B&T APC9 for is being the subcompact weapon system for the US Army. Now, the SCW trials started back in 2018, and they were looking to adopt a submachine gun for use by personal security details in the US Army. So those details will generally travel around combat zones with, say, a general or other important person, Congress member, something like that. And they need to have something very compact that they can keep hidden out in public without causing a stir, but they could pull out and have a very reliable, steady combat weapon if the need arises. There were multiple entrants into those trials. Of course, B&T had the APC9, and the one that eventually won was the K model, which had a shorter barrel. There was also Sig Sauer, which probably had an MPX in those trials, as well as Ingstad Arms, Global Ordnance with the Strebog AP9A3S, which was the shorter version of the Strebog, which in turn was also kind of a copy to a degree of the B&T APC. And then there was also Shield Arms and then Trident Rifles, who used another B&T design, the TP9. The B&T APC9 Pro, which was the eventual winner of the contract, had a 4.3-inch barrel, and it came in a configuration sort of similar to this with the collapsible or retractable B&T stock. And those were very important in their adoption in that they were the first officially adopted submachine gun by the US military since the M3 grease gun in World War II. Not that the US military hadn't been using submachine guns to some degree. Of course, you had the MP5 in service with quite a few different components of the US military, to include Marine security guards as well as Navy SEALs. But for an actual officially adopted firearm, the APC9 was the first since the grease gun. And while they had the Pro model out, they also didn't just stop there with new models of the APC. They also released the APC9G, which used a lower receiver that took Glock magazines, as well as the APC9SD, which is an integrally suppressed version of the APC9. A buddy has one of those. It sounds fantastic when used with even 115 grain ammunition, because it does have a ported barrel, so everything is going to be subsonic when used in that guy. They also had carbine versions with longer barrels, as well as some other models that use different pistol magazines to include P320 magazines, RIP, as well as Walther P99 magazines. Now, the original APC9 magazine was actually a holdover from some older designs that B&T had, namely the TP9 or the MP9, which was a really cool, essentially a reintroduction of the Steyr TMP, which B&T bought the rights to in the early 2000s, and then they heavily modified it, adding a stock, changing around some of the controls and the components on it. However, they kept that original polymer magazine from the TMP. And that gets us up to date on the history of the B&T APC9. So let's go ahead and get into the review. And real quick, I want to give a big shout out to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia. Did a bunch of testing with this guy out there, as well as a ton of competitions over the years, so please check them out. Also want to show for my Patreon as well, which I started up, and mainly to cover ammo, because ammo is not cheap. So if you feel like contributing, I'd appreciate it, but it is not necessary if you don't want to. First up is going to be accuracy, where the APC9 is going to get a 4. At 25 yards, using 147 grain Lawman 9mm ammunition, I was able to get a 3.9 MOA group with the APC9, which is fairly impressive, and it does have a nice trigger, which really does contribute to that as well. Next up is aftermarket support, where the APC9 is going to get a 4, and there's quite a few different options to upgrade your APC9. So starting out straight from B&T, they make quite a few different upgrades for the APC. First, with the lower receiver, there are a ton of different replacement options. They make both aluminum as well as the original polymer lowers, and they make different magazine compatible lowers to include Glock magazines, P320 magazines, as well as Walther P99 magazines. They also make a ton of different stock options for this. So of course on mine, I have the retractable stock, which is incredibly expensive, but very, very nice and well made. They also made side folding polymer stock, which again is very nice and quite a bit cheaper, as well as different types of collapsible stocks that are also side folding, as well as the new MBT stock from B&T, which is not my favorite, but that option is out there, as well as Picatinny rail adapters for this guy, so you can throw whatever you want on it. And they also had an ACR style stock adapter. The next biggest maker of APC9 parts is going to be HB Industries, and they make quite a few different options for this guy. Starting off with the charging handle, the original charging handle on the APC9 is very, very nice. It's ambidextrous, folding on both sides of the receiver and non-reciprocating. But HBI does make an extended charging handle, which is folding for these, as well as several different styles of fixed charging handles, which have some different knurling patterns on it, which are a little bit easier to use. HBI also makes different selector lever options for the APC9 to include an aluminum one, which is a bit of an upgrade over the original polymer, as well as a delete kit, so you can take off either the left or the right side lever if it gets in your way and is a little annoying. They also make panels which fit to the sides of the upper receiver up in the handguard area, so you can either have a smooth-sided panel or one that's compatible with M300 type Surefire lights. A3 Industries has the HD A3 stock from them, which has an adapter for the APC9 and also has a brace option if you want to run it that way and not have to SBR your APC. They also make another brace option with a collapsible stock as well as a new charging handle for these. F5 also has their copy of the ACR stock, which will work on an APC, as well as Midwest Industries makes their own Picatinny rail adapter for these. And finally, we have Lingle Industries, who makes a Scorpion magazine compatible lower for the APC9, which is a very cool option because, again, Scorpion magazines are my favorite PCC magazines. And they do kind of beat the crap out of the original APC magazines, which are straight mags and have some binding issues as well as breakage issues as well. Next up, we have durability, where I'm going to give the APC9 a full 5. So starting out for construction and the look of it, the build of it, it is absolutely fantastic on this guy. This uses a extruded aluminum upper receiver, so it's basically forcing a piece of aluminum through a mold or through a die so that you get a long stretch of receiver sections and you just chop off a piece that you want to use for an APC9 receiver. It's a more modern way of making receivers, which are very, very strong and pretty economical to make. Additionally, the polymer and the finish on the APC9 is incredibly good. This is a Swiss gun and it lives up to the name. The machining is fantastic. This has one of the smoothest bolt throws on any PCC that I've ever used. Everything is almost perfect on this guy. The only places where there might be some concern is with these APC magazines or the TP9 mags, TMP mags. They have been known to potentially break feed lips over the years, so that is something to keep in mind with these. And they also might have a little bit of binding in the magazines. I haven't had that become an issue with reliability with the APC. These have worked great for me. Some of the base plates also have been known to break on these if you drop them on a hard surface. Again, that's not an issue that I've had, and they actually make rubber bumpers for these magazines to kind of ameliorate that problem. I did also see one report of somebody breaking the pistol grip off of the lower receiver so that the actual tang of the lower where the pistol grip attaches to broke off on them. So if you do drop it on a hard surface, that could potentially happen. Of course, mine has not had that issue happen with it, but somebody has had that problem. When it comes to ergonomics, the APC is going to get a full 5. So let's go ahead, start out with the front here with the charging handles. They are on both sides of the receiver. They do fold. They're very, very nice, and they keep nice and tight so they don't get in the way. It is non-reciprocating, so if I go ahead and lock it back here, you can see it stays to the front up there. And these do lock in place pretty well, so it's not going to be bouncing around when you're firing it like it does with the Streebog. So overall, I really, really like the charging handle on here. Now moving down to the bolt release, it is this ledge right here. On both sides of the receiver, it is incredibly easy to use. To drop the bolt, you just press down on it. It's a little tight on an empty mag, but it will send your bolt home. Now, if we drop the magazine and you want to actually lock it back, just pull back on your charging handle, you lift up on the ledge, and it will lock back. Now for the magazine release, it is on the right side here, and you can see it just lifts out like that, and it's very nice, easy to get to. And then it is mirrored also on the left side of the receiver right here. Although it's more of a button style, it's very well placed and very easy to get to. And go ahead and throw my mag back in here. And moving back to the safety selector, that's again ambidextrous on this. The left side is going to be a little bit larger than the right side, and it is very nice, stiff, clicks into place well. Sometimes a little too stiff on these guys. And then you can see on the right side, a little bit smaller here, but again, I really don't have a problem with this. 45 degrees, very easy to use. The APC9 also comes with folding backup iron sights, and these are fairly inexpensive polymer sights. Pretty easy to use. They do their job pretty well. But when you fold them down here, they also have a little pistol notch up front as well as in the back if you want to use them, which I never actually would. But that option is there. Now moving back to the stock. This is again the B&T retractable stock, which is incredibly expensive, but very, very nice. Made of aluminum, and it's very, very smooth and well made. To slide it in, you just press in this button here, And you can slide it collapsed here all the way in, and you can see it is a very compact package, just sticking off an inch or two off the back. And it does have a nice little rubber butt plate back here. Now to extend the stock, you just grab it, pull it all the way out, and it'll lock in place. And that is all we have to go over for ergonomics. Next up, we have maintenance, where the APC9 is going to get a full 5. As far as disassembly goes, it's very easy and very familiar for AR-15 owners with the APC. You just have 2 push pins in the lower, which you can pop out. You can either just hinge it open on the front push pin, or you can pop both out and take the entire lower off. And then you can just pop down on the stock, remove your stock and buffer assembly, at which point the bolt will just pop out the rear after you remove a pin, which is kind of in the same position as it would be if it were a fixed charging handle. So that's kind of a holdover from the original APC9 design, which actually used a charging handle as a pin that held the bolt in the receiver. So they still do have something in there for that. However, it is very easy to remove. Now, actually cleaning everything in there is pretty easy to do. There are some tight spaces near the rear of the extruded aluminum receiver, but you can get up into the chamber and the barrel really easily. Your bolt is incredibly easy to clean because it's straight blowback, so there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with it. And it also has a pin that you can remove to punch out your firing pin, which is very easy to do and really nice if you end up breaking a firing pin, so you're not having to worry about a roll pin, which is more of a pain to deal with. Now, for getting replacement parts for the APC9, it's actually fairly easy. BT Parts, the website, does carry pretty much every single part, component, even screws, springs, everything on their website. It may take a little bit to get those in if they aren't in stock, and it's kind of hard to tell on their website if something's in stock or not, but they are all available. Some parts are actually fairly inexpensive. Firing pins are not too expensive, which is really nice. But of course, being a Swiss firearm, some of the parts are going to be very expensive. So it is easy to get parts for these. However, they are going to be fairly expensive. Next up is going to be modularity, where I'm giving the APC9 a 4. So starting off with the buttstock, you have a ton of different options for these. It's very modular. You can swap it out for a ton of different things, different braces, stock options, all sorts of stuff. So that is really well designed, and the aftermarket really suits that well. The lower receiver also has a lot of compatibility with the AR-15 as far as the pistol grip goes. You can swap that for almost anything you want. There are some concerns about the trigger. There are some AR-15 triggers that will work in the APC and some that won't, mainly the kinds that come in cassettes. So your kind of pre-contained triggers will likely not work in the APC9, whereas your Geisley trigger, where it's just the components floating out there, you will likely be able to fit it in here. Where I am going to drop off some points here, though, is going to be the handguard, which is a fixed aluminum handguard. It's part of the receiver. It's integrated into it, so you can't do anything to swap that out. It is really nice having that Picatinny rail on the bottom and the 2 M-LOK slots on either side, but you really can't do anything to extend it. I haven't seen a whole lot of products out there to be able to give you a little bit more room if you want to sink a suppressor underneath it. And to that note, also barrels are going to be more or less impossible to swap out. Like physically it is possible. You could remove the screws from the trunnion and pull your barrel and slide a new one in there, but they're not really available and there's not many options to swap that out for. So that's still going to end up losing out a bit. Another really nice thing on the modularity for the APC is different magazines. So if you do swap that lower out, you can use Glock mags, you can use P320 mags, P99 mags. There are tons of options, and Lingle Industries, you do get the Scorpion mag, which is my personal favorite. So that is a very nice modular choice there. Price is where things are really going to take a downturn for the APC9, coming in at a 2 because these cost over $2,000. They're very expensive guns because they are very Swiss guns. What you do get for your money is an incredibly well-made firearm with some of the best finish and fit in the entire business, so there is a reason they're very expensive. It is a little bit weird that there's not a whole lot of complexity to the gun given how much it costs. However, again, labor in Switzerland is very expensive, so I understand why it is going to be a more expensive firearm. And next up, we got shooting characteristics, where I'm giving the APC9 a 4. Starting off with the trigger is a very nice 2-ish stage trigger that comes in at about 5 pounds, 2 ounces. So it's fairly lightweight, all things considered, but it is very clean. It's got a nice take-up and a very crisp break. And my favorite part of it is actually the reset. It's got a really nice clunky reset to it. Now, when it comes to the recoil impulse on the APC9, it's kind of a mixed bag in my opinion. So you can definitely tell a difference with this and that hydraulic buffer in the stock compared to other straight blowback 9mm, looking at UCZ Scorpion. And it does definitely soak up some of that recoil. However, I still think it is a bit of a stiffer recoil when compared to some of the late blowback systems out there. So obviously the full-size MP5 is going to have a much nicer recoil impulse in this guy. And then even the MPX and the SP9A3, the Streebog, I think have slightly better recoils than the APC9. However, it is still a lot better than other straight blowback PCCs. When it comes to suppressing the APC9, it's also a bit of a mixed bag, and that again comes down to that straight blowback system. So of course, you only have the weight of the bolt and the spring keeping that bolt closed, so if you introduce more back pressure with a can on there, it's going to open up a little faster. It doesn't make it dangerous, but you end up getting more gas coming back at you with it. So it's not terrible with this. So of course I used it with my rugged Obsidian 45, which is a standard full back pressure can. And with that, you definitely get a little bit of gas, but it's not too bad. And then when I use my B&T TP9 RBS can, which is a reduced back pressure can on this, it is very, very nice. There is still a little bit of gas coming back out of it, but you're going to get that most of the time with a straight blowback. When it comes to reliability, I have to give the APC9 a 5 because I've never had really any issues to speak of with this. Straight blowbacks in general are going to be quite reliable as far as the mechanical system goes. The magazines are always going to be a touch point for any firearm, and I have had pretty good luck with the B&T magazines. However, some of them could have some issues if you have monopod on the magazine. I've been able to induce some stoppages doing that with the APC9, but otherwise I really haven't had any issues with it. When it comes to weight, I'm giving the APC9 a 4 because it weighs in at 5 pounds, 3 ounces. So one of the lighter PCCs out there, despite it being a straight blowback with a heavy bolt. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories on the B&T APC9, we come out with a score of 42, which is our first S-tier PCC. And it really does have a lot going for it. It's one of the more balanced PCCs out there. The ergonomics are some of my favorite in the entire business. It's been incredibly reliable for me. Overall, the shooting characteristics are also pretty nice on it. It doesn't have the nicest recoil in the game, or it's not the best suppressor host in the entire PCC market, but it is very well balanced. And of course, being a Swiss gun, the fit and finish on this guy is second to none. It is absolutely smooth and very, very, very nice to actually use. Everything on it is really well done, so I can't fault it at all on the build quality. Now, there's really only one downside to this gun, and that's going to be the price. Of course, again, being Swiss, this thing is going to be very expensive, coming in at over $2,000. So it's going to hit your wallet pretty hard, but you do get quite a bit in return. And finally, when it comes to the cool tier for the APC9, I'm going to put it up into the A tier. And first of all, I think this is just a very attractive looking gun aesthetically. So looking at it from the outside, it always reminded me of what would happen if FN decided to build a SCAR PCC. That's kind of what it looks like, particularly in this beautiful flat dark earth color scheme. And I think just aesthetically from the outer appearance, it looks very modern and very svelte compared to some other PCCs out there. When it comes to movie appearances, there haven't been a ton, but there have been a few for the APC9. Way back in like 2013, very early on in its life cycle, White House Down actually had a couple of APC9s in there. And then you also had APC9s in both of the Kingsman movies, making some fairly small appearances, but they were in there. And more recently, it was also in The Beekeeper and Heads of State. When it comes to video games, there's been a couple of appearances, but not a ton so far. It's been in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the 2019 version, as well as Modern Warfare 2, and then also Battlefield 2042, but there haven't been a ton of other appearances so far. Alright guys, and that's going to do it for my review on the B&T APC9, one of my favorite PCCs. So thank you for checking out the video, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.